Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to Coffee with Craig, where we talk about all things firearms, policy, politics, culture, media, you name it. We're talking about it right here on Coffee with Craig. So please take a moment, like and share the program so that your friends can join in the conversation. Also, if you haven't already done so, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook. And in both cases, make sure you hit the notification button. Also, we're doing a lot of posting now on Instagram. So if you're not a Facebook person and you want to make sure you get all of our action alerts and all the stuff that we're doing that's not posted on YouTube, make sure you follow us on Instagram. Also, visit fpcgear.com. That's fpcgear.com. Folks, this is the place to go to get your Pro 2A swag. We've got t-shirts, we've got coffee mugs, we've got hoodies. The weather's changing, so I know it's time to get some new gear. But here's the thing. Every dollar that you spend goes right back into the fight for a right to keep and bear arms. So the cool part is you can support the Second Amendment and you can look good doing it. You do that at fpcgear.com. All right, we're in the middle of a three-part series. We're talking about the assault weapons ban hearing that took place on September 25th in Washington, D.C. in the House. We've talked about, now once again, there's so much stuff that is in this thing. If you haven't seen the other two videos, please make sure you do that. We're talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly from this hearing. We've already talked about the good. That's the stuff that, you know, the positive things that any objective person, if they heard it, would probably come to understand why we believe what we believe and why what we believe, quite frankly, is right. The bad is the just some of the really bad stuff, and in particular things that they're leaning on in terms of their arguments. And so it's a good way to help us understand what their arguments are and the directions that they want to go in terms of policy. Today, we're going to be talking about the ugly. Now, the ugly, this is basically the stuff that, how shall I say, this is the stuff that is going to make your blood boil, to be quite honest. This is the stuff that when I heard it, I had to go, in many cases, I had to go back and I had to rewatch it again. Did I hear what I thought I just heard? Because it demonstrated either how shockingly ignorant they are, or just how blatant they are in terms of their lies and their rhetoric, that they don't care what the facts are. But it's the sort of stuff that, quite frankly, to me is meme-worthy, and is the sort of stuff that we ought to all make sure that we're sharing. Now, it starts off with Representative Collins. Now, he actually doesn't say anything ugly or stupid. He is quoting other individuals who have said who've said a couple of different things that are outrageous. And the whole point of his opening, he's the ranking member on the committee. The whole point of this was to really kind of introduce us to the sort of lunacy and stupidity and misinformation that's being perpetrated by those on the other side of this argument. Here's what he had to say, and you'll recognize probably these comments.
Sadly, disinformation comes from many sources. A state senator from California, when speaking about an assault weapon, stated that right here has the ability of 30, and this is their term, not mine, a 30 caliber clip, should be a magazine, to disperse 30 bullets in a half a second. 30 magazine to disperse in a half second. Either that's a blatant misrepresentation or an indication of shocking ignorance. Even a fully automatic military-issued M4 cannot fire at such a rate. Another member of the committee stated that I've held an AR-15 in my hand. Wish I hadn't. It was as heavy as 10 boxes that you might be moving, and a bullet that is utilized is a 50 caliber. These kinds of bullets need to be licensed and do not need to be on the street. This is a brief statement that somehow manages to make several basic factual errors. An AR-15 weighs between 6 and 7 pounds, fires a .223 round of ammunition. It does not fire 50 caliber ammunition. Anyone who knows or discussed this about firearms would know that it is absurd to even suggest it.
All right, so the two people that he talked about, one of them was a couple of years ago, and I happen to know this individual, State Senator Kevin De Leon, and it was so meme-worthy. I know you've heard it. The 30 magazine clip, I know you guys have heard it. There have been what do they call, auto-tuned songs made of this particular clip. Once again, just demonstrating complete and utter ignorance that some individuals have. And then the other one was more recent, and that was from Ms. Jackson Lee, Miss Lee from Texas, most recently. And she said that she basically had held an AR-15, and it was as heavy as 10 boxes. She also made it a point to say that, they fire 50 caliber rounds, which just goes to show you that this woman has absolutely no idea what she's talking about, but yet somehow she feels it appropriate for her to be regulating it. So these are the opinions, the beliefs that these individuals have. And once again, their beliefs are not based on facts. They're not based on information. They're based on feelings and politics and what they believe will make them look good and feel good. Now, with that, I want to introduce you to the queen of the ugly in this particular hearing, and that would be the police chief from the city of Charlotte, Miss Rachel Brackney. I have to say that there were a number of stupid, idiotic, and just quite frankly wrong comments that were made, and it's sad that in this particular case that it had to be a law enforcement officer that was the greatest perpetrator of the misinformation. Tell you what. Let's just start. By the way, she's here representing an organization called NOBLE, the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. I know a number of black law enforcement executives, and she is not representative of them, at least not in terms of her understanding of this issue. Here we go.
Noble is very concerned about the level of gun violence in the United States, and specifically the correlation between violence and the proliferation of assault weapons and high-capacity ammunition magazines.
Okay, so they're concerned about gun violence, and specifically they're talking about assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. But yet, in most of the cases, in most of these cities, in particular major cities, gun violence overall is not perpetrated with semi-automatic rifles. It's not, and it's definitely not with semi-automatic rifles with standard capacity magazines. How about this? How about the fact that the overwhelming majority has to do with gang violence? Oh, but you don't want to talk about the proliferation of violence amongst gangs. You want to talk about high-capacity magazines, even though, or semi-automatic rifles. Even though, by the way, we know that, that's just not, that's not exactly where these crimes are being committed. But once again, that wasn't her only crazy statement. There's more.
It is our organization's opinion that violence, particularly gun violence, is a public health issue. And as with all public health issues, it demands a comprehensive, non-judgmental, pragmatic, evidence-based approach to saving lives and reducing injury.
Okay, pragmatic, evidence-based, non-judgmental. Tell me, is this non-judgmental?
When we are too cowardly to face issues and instead let them to expire like we would milk in our refrigerator versus taking some sort of action. As we know in any other field, think about the medical field, there's often incremental steps that we take in order to create medications to address cancer. We don't say until we have the cure, we do nothing. And we're doing something very similar when it comes to law enforcement. The attacks on law enforcement, the ambushes on law enforcement have increased. People have been emboldened by the fact that not only do they have the weapon and the capacity to do that, but there's the prevalence of which they can get these weapons. There's now also the ghost weapons, in which you buy pieces and parts of it so that you can get around, again, legislation when it comes to what you must be required to do in order to obtain a weapon legally.
Okay. Now, did that sound non-judgmental to you? I don't know about you, but it didn't sound non-judgmental to me, because it said that basically because you won't ban guns, you're cowards. That sounds kind of judgmental. And then when we start talking about being factual, her definition of what is a ghost gun. Now, the worst thing is that you and I both know there's no such real thing as a ghost gun. There's a gun that's serialized and a gun that's not serialized. But her definition of home builds, she's now turned home builds, or the ability to build a firearm at home, she's now confused that with what a ghost gun is. And oh, by the way, people are attacking law enforcement officers because there's access to semi-automatic rifles? No, absolutely, positively no judgment there. That's pragmatic, right? Come on, really? This is the best that they have to offer. Honestly, seriously, this is the best they have to offer. And the thing is that there's even more.
And what's actually is disingenuous is that we're arguing about terminology. When you're looking down the face of a high-powered, high-velocity weapon, do you really want to ask, is it an AR, an AK, and can you pull it one trigger at a time, or is it a semi-automatic, or is it something more? I also say the same thing is when we're talking about even arguing pushing back against a only person that should stop a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun. Actually, what stops a bad person with a gun is keeping a gun out of their hands to start with.
All right, let's break this down. So in other words, what she's saying is the facts don't matter. The details don't matter. Even though you and I, the citizens, are going to wind up in jail based on those technicalities. Based on the technicalities, because we're going to comply with the law. That's like saying, well, you know what? The speed limit is 65 miles per hour. If you drive 64, she's saying law enforcement should have a right to pull you over no matter what. You still committed something illegal. Why? Because why should it matter that you were 1 mile under? Why should it matter? Because to her, it doesn't matter. The law does not matter. It's about how you feel, right? It's about how you feel. And the worst part is, once again, she has no idea what she is talking about. Right? Talking about, the best way to get a good guy with a gun is to make sure a bad guy doesn't have it. And yet, and still, it's illegal for quote-unquote bad guys to have guns. And guess what? You, law enforcement, officer, official, police chief, you guys keep letting them have it. For some reason, we have laws in place that are supposed to keep bad guys, these individuals from getting guns, and yet and still, they still get them. How is that? See, you want us to trust you with our safety, but you don't even know how to run a program. You don't even know how to keep us safe. But here's the deal, and ultimately what it comes down to is this, and we know this, we're our own first responder. I have total respect for law enforcement, but I know it's not their job to keep me safe. It's their job to enforce our laws. That's what their job is, to protect the Constitution and enforce our laws. That's their job. It's my job to keep me safe. Right? It's my job. I am my own first responder. And therefore, by taking that into my responsibility, when law enforcement eventually does show up during those crisis moments, then I'll let them handle it. But see, this is the sort of idiocy. And here's the thing. It gets even worse. So, Congressman Sensenbrenner, Representative Sensenbrenner, was asked a question. He said, well, if a sporting rifle, if a modern sporting rifle fit the definition of what they are trying to say is an assault weapon, should it be banned? Now, here is the right answer, what the answer should be.
If the question is whether hunting rifles should be banned just because they are semi-automatic, the answer is no. And I would point out that, again, when we're talking about functional difference between hunting rifles and assault weapons, we're not talking about lethality, we're not talking about caliber, we're talking about things like pistol grips and barrel shrouds that don't change the functional mechanics. And so I would say, no, we shouldn't be banning hunting rifles just because they have pistol grip and are easier to use.
Exactly. See, now that was the right answer, right? No, if you shouldn't be banning something simply because you're talking about cosmetic features. But no, here was the answer that Chief Brackney gave.
And I believe any weapon that can be used to hunt individuals should be banned.
That got applause. It got applause. So any weapon. So in other words, any handgun, any shotgun, any single-shot musket, any bow and arrow, any knife, any spear, anything that you can use to hunt should be banned. And by the way, she was given an opportunity to back down, to back up and backtrack, and guess what she wound up doing? She doubled down on her comment. She doubled down on it. Now, just tell me right now. You guys have heard it all. Am I wrong? Is she not the queen of the ugly? She should be the face. I'm telling you that anyway. She should be the face of the anti-gun movement because she does everything possible to make our point for us. Okay, let's move right along. Here's another particular one that I think you're gonna love.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I don't necessarily profess to be an expert in hunting varmint, but my general sense is that if you're hitting them with an AK-15, you're not hunting them, you're killing them. And that's the only purpose of doing it. But let me just get two things straight with Mrs. Swear and Mrs. Muller. Both of you all mentioned that the purpose you see, especially with your mother and her choosing her firearm, was accuracy and stopping power. So when you describe characteristics for self-defense, you would characterize stopping power and accuracy as primary objectives.
Yes, sir.
Yes, if I have a threat, I want it to stop.
Okay. Now, let me go to Chief Brackney real quick with Noble. Let's take the gun, the FN-57, for example, which has 0 knockdown power, but its bullets will go through your shield, if you have an armor shield, and your vest. If it has 0 stopping power, what self-defense purpose does that gun, the FN-57, have?
It would not. When you think about stopping power and the risk of being on the other end or the receiving end of those high velocity, high capacity rounds.
Okay, so this is Representative Richmond. Let's just break a couple of things down here now. First of all, what is an AK-15 and how can I get one? Because I've never heard of one, therefore it must be rare, and if it's rare, it's probably worth having. Just saying. So he starts off with complete and utter ignorance. Then he goes to, well, you're not hunting varmints, you're killing them. Okay, last I checked, to a certain degree, that when you hunt, the goal is to kill. But I'm not even going to go there. All right? But then he gets into talking about an obscure weapon, the FN-57. Now, what's interesting about this is that when we've done our giveaways, we've given away a number of these, so I'm familiar with them. I have a good friend who owns one. They're interesting little guns. First of all, not interesting. They are very, very neat. They are very, very cool. But what's interesting about them is a couple of things. Number one, they're relatively expensive. They're not guns that are common. They're not firearms that are commonly owned, largely because the ammunition for them is not real easy to find. Now, here's the interesting part about it. Now, the FN-57 happens to be a favorite of, say, Secret Service. Now, which, by the way, tells me exactly who he was talking to in order to get his talking points on this. So first of all, understand this. It's a handgun. It's not a long gun. It's not only is it not a long gun, it's not what they would classify as an assault weapon, right? So I don't understand the whole point of bringing it up in this conversation, number one. Number two, now there is ammunition for the FN-57 that's made available to the public, which is very, very hard to find and extremely expensive. And then there's that, which he was talking about, that once again, I'll go through armor, right? But only law enforcement can get it. He didn't tell you that, did he? No, he sure didn't tell you. Only law enforcement can purchase that ammunition. It's available only to law enforcement. But see, he was trying to make a point, right? And the worst part is that here it is, supposedly you have this expert, Chief Brackney, who's supposed to be talking about this subject, and she doesn't know that. She doesn't bring it up. So here you have a guy, I would call him a FUD, but the thing is he's demonstrated he's demonstrated his complete and utter ignorance, and he's told us exactly who he's been talking to. And he didn't even bother to get his talking points right. Anyway, he continues.
We can argue over assault rifle, how we determine it, but let's just, for purpose of this hearing, call them weapons of mass destruction.
Okay, so once again, we're not going to talk technicalities. We're not going to talk about what is going to determine whether or not we wind up in jail or not. Let's not talk about that. It's one of those, it's an assault weapon if, I know it when I see it type of deals. Why? Because they'll never own one. So they'll never risk having to go to jail. But instead of even attempting to be accurate, we're going to now become hyperbolic, and we're going to go blow it out of the water. We're going to call them weapons of mass destruction. That's where we are now. They are now weapons of mass destruction. And that, my friends, and once again, we also have Chief Brackney, who's there saying, well, we need to be, what was the word she used? Rational. I forget what the term was she used, but the point is, she was saying that we should be non-biased, non-judgmental, yada yada yada. And yet, this is the mentality of where we're at on this. Let's go on to the next one, because trust me, it doesn't end there.
I guess I'm trying to make a balance in between that need for a weapon of mass destruction and the need for self-defense, because I think of my family. But when I thought about my family not being necessarily the best in marksmanship, I thought about having a shotgun which has a wide spray. And then there's a gun called the Judge, which is could fire 357 bullet. It's a revolver, or it could fire a shotgun shell, which is great for self-defense. But the question becomes, why such large capacity magazines on these assault weapons and assault rifles if we're talking about hunting? When you hunt, you miss, you load up again, you try again. But if your goal is mass carnage, then you just keep pulling your trigger, or you install a bump stock and you can create multiple carnage. So
once again, and he brings up bump stocks, which, by the way, are rare. I mean, honestly, the ban on them, or the pre-ban on them, before when they start talking about the ban, they probably sold more bump stocks during that era than they did any time in total before that. I don't know that to be the case, but I wouldn't be surprised. But once again, now he brings up obscure firearms as, well, this is something, and let me show you that I know how to use Google, and I can Google something. And once again, demonstrate complete and utter ignorance. And then, when you start talking about self-defense, he says, well, you're just going to use them to create mass carnage. And also brings up, once again, the weapons of mass destruction argument, once again, followed by his ignorance. And that is also followed, well, let's just be honest, he wasn't the only one who used the terminology weapons of mass destruction.
And as long as we have people who say, I deserve to have a weapon of mass destruction so that I can shoot critters, as we've heard today, or so that I can have an accessory like shoes, as we've heard today, then we will continue to see massacres and bloodshed.
Because wanting to own a firearm that is easy to use, that allows you to be able to effectively defend yourself, well, that firearm must be a weapon of mass destruction. And the analogy that she was referring to was one of the other, Diana Muller, was talking about how she was trying to talk about how you choose your firearm based on what the need is. And so she was simply utilizing that as an example. And her comment was that, the AR-15 is something that can be, she compared it to a comfortable dress shoe. In other words, you can use it in multiple situations. Right? It's because of its flexibility, because you can modify it. It's easier for you to be able to use to defend yourself. She talked about how she uses it for home defense. She can actually have it in her car because it's small enough. All of that. But none of that made the firearm more lethal. None of it. None of the flexibility and the functionality make it more lethal. But yet for some reason, or more lethal than any hunting rifle. And I love the way they keep bringing up the whole idea of hunting. I'm sorry, the Second Amendment has absolutely nothing to do with hunting. And they need to stop talking about that. And people need to call them out when they do. And for all of you out there who are hunters, more power to you. But the Second Amendment has nothing to do with that. If you got a problem with that, take that up with the folks who wrote it. I didn't write it. I'm just telling you the way it is. And then we have this guy, Mr. Chipman. Now, I want you to understand that, once again, this is a guy who worked for ATF and now works for Gifford. And he is a career gun grabber. He did it for a while in the public sector. Now he's doing it in the private nonprofit sector. And truth is not a tool that he utilizes in his work.
Shipman, how does a pistol grip and barrel shroud make it more likely a mass shooter will be able to kill many people?
Well, as Senator Cruz has demonstrated, a barrel of an AR-15 can get really hot if you try to cook bacon on it. So imagine if you're a determined killer and you're firing hundreds of rounds. This would allow you to grip the firearm in a way that would increase your ability to spray fire and kill more people.
So basically his position is, because a firearm is functional, because it protects the user, that in and of itself makes it more deadly. That is the sort of terminology and the sort of thinking that they have. In other words, they don't care about the people who use firearms. They don't care. You don't matter to them at all. Because if you want to use a firearm, well, clearly you are evil. If you want to own a firearm, clearly you are evil. So we don't care if we protect you from burning yourself. We don't care if you're able to utilize a firearm to effectively defend yourself. But folks, that is their mentality. Their mentality is we want to take all guns away from all people. That way, we can tell people how to live, and they can't resist. We can tell them how to raise their children. We can tell them what they can eat. We can tell them where they can live. We can tell them all sorts of things. Fascism then becomes, or their fascism then becomes the sort of lifestyle that they can then force upon you because, well, you won't have an ability to be able to defend yourself from it. And that is their goal, ladies and gentlemen. And that's why we here at the Firearms Policy Coalition fight. We hope that you will fight with us. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are the Firearms Policy Coalition. Please remember to like and share these videos and tell everyone about FPC. We are the home in the fight for civil rights. Got to use them or you're going to lose them. You guys take care.
If you like our videos, follow, subscribe, like, and share.